I looked out the window and saw my little Lucas, just 5 years old, running in the dusty street. He was so happy with a wide, carefree smile, as if he was unaware of the hardships surrounding us. The sun was barely out, but the light in his eyes illuminated everything around me. "Mommy, look what I found!" he shouted, holding a piece of wood he had found among the rubble. My heart tightened. It was that innocent look that made me want to give him the world, but reality was cruel. What I could offer was a life marked by poverty and pain. My husband, always aggressive and impatient, often took his anger out on me. He didn't understand the love I had for our son, and each day the atmosphere at home grew heavier. "Lucas, my love, come here," I called, trying to hide the sadness in my voice. He ran to me, his bare feet kicking up dust as he approached. I knelt to his level and looked into those bright eyes. "What are you going to do today?" I asked, trying to sound cheerful. "I'm going to play knight," he replied, swinging the wood like it was a sword. My heart broke when I heard that. How could I keep living this way? The fights with my husband had become unbearable, and I knew Lucas didn't deserve to grow up in such a home. Every day, the idea of giving him up for adoption grew stronger in my mind. I wanted him to have a better life, away from the fighting and the misery. That morning after breakfast, the argument between us was more intense. He had come home early, and I already knew it wasn't going to be a good day. His voice rose and his words became sharp knives. "You do nothing but complain, Maria," he shouted. "Do you think I'm a monster?" I closed my eyes, trying to hold back the tears. The response I wanted to give got stuck in my throat. With every shout, I felt the resolve in my decision solidifying. What if I gave Lucas away? What if I let him go in search of a life I couldn't provide? When the argument finally ended, I looked at Lucas, who was in a corner, scared. The little being I loved more than anything in the world was there, with a confused look, and I didn't want him to grow up in this environment. At that moment, I made one of the hardest decisions of my life. "Lucas, my love, do you remember when we talked about children who have different families?" I asked, trying to find words that wouldn't hurt him. He nodded, still not understanding. "There are some kids who need a new home, and maybe you can find a family that will make you happier." My voice trembled and I knew I was about to break. "But I want to stay with you, Mommy," he replied, his eyes full of tears. "I know, my son, I know," I whispered as my heart shattered. "But I want what's best for you." The decision was made. With a broken heart, I knew I had to let him go. The next day came and everything felt like a nightmare. The car that would take him away arrived, and I said goodbye to him with a hug that lasted an eternity. "I will find you one day, Lucas," I promised, feeling the tears stream down my face. He walked away, looking at me with a mix of love and confusion. As the car drove away, my heart broke into 1,000 pieces. I promised myself I would never give up on finding him, even if the pain was unbearable. Despair surrounded me, but hope still shone in my chest. The years passed in a blur, and I found myself older, with the marks of life etched on my face and calloused hands. The pain of being separated from Lucas had never faded. Every day that dawned, the hope of finding him still pulsed within me, even as the reality of my life wrapped me in its heavy mantle of hardships. The morning sun seemed to shine differently, as if it wanted to remind me that, despite everything, I still had a goal: to find my son. That morning, after a watery and sugarless coffee, I put on my cloak and set out for another day of searching. The city, which once seemed so welcoming, now felt like an endless labyrinth of indifference and contempt. Every orphanage I visited was a new disappointment, a new blow to my already wounded heart. "I'm sorry, ma'am, we don't have any information about children adopted years ago," the attendant would say with an empty look, as if her life was just a routine devoid of emotion. One afternoon, I entered a shelter that a neighbor had recommended. The place smelled of disinfectant mixed with the sweet aroma of cookies the children were making. The environment, though welcoming, carried a sadness that I knew all too well. As I walked through the hallways, I saw a woman sitting on a bench, her eyes swollen from crying. "Hi," I said, trying to break the heavy silence. She looked up. "Hi," she replied, her voice trembling. "Are you here looking for someone too?" "Yes, I'm looking for my son. He was adopted many years ago." I felt a tear escape but quickly wiped it away. "And you?" "My name is Anna. I'm looking for my daughter. She's 10 now. The last time I saw her, she was only 6. She sighed, looking at the ground. "It's like a part of me died." My eyes filled with tears, but I knew I had to be strong. "We're not alone, Anna. Many mothers go through this. The pain is immense, but we can't give up." Anna nodded, and a comfortable silence formed between us. We talked about our experiences, our hopes and fears. It was as if the burden we carried became a little lighter by sharing it. Returning home that night, the emptiness enveloped me again. The silence in my house was deafening, and I knew I had to do something to calm my restless heart. I picked up a piece of paper and a pen and began to write a letter to Lucas. The words flowed like a rushing river, filled with love and longing. "My dear Lucas," I began, the letters trembling on the paper. "If you ever read this, know that I never stopped loving you. Every day that passes, my heart cries out for your smile. I hope you're happy wherever you are. Life hasn't been easy for me, but the hope of finding you keeps me alive." I continued writing about the difficulties I faced, the nights I dreamed of him, and how each dawn brought me the certainty that one day, somehow, I would find him. I carefully placed the letter in a box that I kept hidden. It was my treasure, a piece of my love saved for my son. The days turned into months, and the search became a part of me. I went to every shelter, every orphanage, looking for Lucas's familiar gaze among the children. Society often looked at me with contempt, but I didn't let it get me down. Every no I received was just one step closer to the yes I so desperately wanted. "Ma'am, what are you doing here again?" asked one of the staff at a shelter when he saw me enter. "Back to searching as always," I replied with a sad smile. "One day I will find him." And even though doubt haunted me, I knew I couldn't give up. Lucas was the light that still illuminated my path. The day was overcast when I received the news that would change my life. My doctor had requested a more detailed examination, and after days of anxiety, the time finally came to hear the result. As I entered the doctor's office, his expression was serious, and my heart began to race. "Mrs. Maria, we need to talk," he said, and I knew the conversation wouldn't be good. "What is it, doctor?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He looked at me with compassion and at the same time, with the seriousness of someone carrying a heavy burden. "The tests indicated a critical condition. We need to act quickly." His words echoed in my mind like a drum, and I felt the ground open up beneath my feet. Devastated, I left the office, overwhelmed by the agonizing certainty that time was running out. What I wanted most was to find Lucas, my son. I needed to see him, to tell him how much I loved him, how much I still thought about him. The idea that I might not have another chance to hold him consumed me. How could I live with this pain any longer? I decided then that I would go to the nearest hospital. The walk there was a ritual of hope and despair at the same time. Each step I took was a mixture of memories of Lucas and the pain of his absence. He was so far from me, and I wondered if he still remembered his mother. Did he know that I never stopped loving him, even after all these years? As I walked, the rain began to fall, first in light drops, then torrentially. The cold wetness penetrated my bones, but I didn't care. My mind was focused on one thing: finding Lucas. "I will find him," I whispered to myself like a mantra. "I need to find him before it's too late." Then everything happened in a blink. A car appeared at high speed, and before I could react, I felt a strong impact, and then everything went dark. The last thing I remembered was seeing the gray sky blending with the rainwater. I was floating, lost between consciousness and void. When I regained my senses, I was in an unfamiliar place. The smell of disinfectant and the sound of machines surrounded me. I tried to move, but my body was heavy and sore. I heard voices around me, but I couldn't understand what they were saying. Every attempt to open my eyes felt like the light would blind me. "Mom, are you with me?" A familiar voice reverberated in my mind, and I didn't know if I was dreaming. The warmth of that voice enveloped me, but it was so distant. Hours passed as if they were days, and I floated between life and death. What seemed like a dream became more real. I wanted to scream. I wanted someone to know that I was there, that I needed to find my son. What would happen if I couldn't? What if this was my last moment? Amid the confusion, a figure approached me. It was a doctor. His face was young, but his expression was serene. He spoke firmly, trying to calm me, but I couldn't focus. "Mrs. Maria, we need to stabilize you. You're safe now," he said, but I didn't feel safe at all. "Lucas," I murmured, my voice failing. My son's name escaped my lips like a whisper of hope. The doctor hesitated for a moment, and the concern in his eyes made me feel a chill down my spine. He picked up a clipboard and began writing something, but my mind was so confused that I couldn't understand. What I knew was that I had to fight. I had to live. "Please help me find him," I thought, but the words wouldn't come out. And so, between light and darkness, between pain and hope, I floated in that unknown space, with only one certainty: I wouldn't give up. I would find my son no matter what. The hospital was a labyrinth of fluorescent lights and muffled murmurs. I was lying in a bed that felt colder than the floor of my house. The pain throbbed in my body, but somehow I was more worried about what would happen to my Lucas, where he might be now. The memory of his little face, with those rosy cheeks and innocent smile, mingled with the pain of my current situation. Dr. Raphael entered the room with a serious look, but not without a hint of kindness. He was young, probably in his 30s, and had a presence that conveyed security. "Good morning, Mrs. Maria. I'm Dr. Raphael, and I'll be taking care of you," he said, while checking the monitors around me. I'm fine," I tried to say, but my voice failed. The weight of my reality was suffocating me. The truth was that I wasn't fine. "And my son? Is he okay?" Raphael paused for a moment, and I realized he hesitated to answer. "We're doing our best to stabilize you. But before anything else, I need to ensure that you recover." "We'll take care of that first," he replied, but his gaze seemed distant, as if he was thinking about something else. As he spoke, I couldn't help but notice his gestures. He was meticulous. Every movement revealed a care that went beyond medicine. He seemed to genuinely care. At that moment, I wanted to believe he was a good man, someone who could help me. But who could help me find my son? Raphael left the room, and I was alone, lost in my thoughts. The pain throbbed, but the anguish of not knowing about my Lucas was even stronger. I wondered if he still remembered me, if he had a good life, if he was happy. The image of him being taken away, with his suitcase in hand and that innocent expression, came back to my mind like a shadow that never faded. Some time later, Raphael returned, now with a folder of documents in his hands. He began reviewing my medical records, but suddenly stopped. "Mrs. Maria, you have a photo here," he said, almost as if he were talking to himself. He held up the photo, and I recognized it instantly. It was an old photo of me with Lucas, taken on a sunny day in a park. His smile was pure, and I felt a wave of nostalgia and pain at the same time. "Is this your son?" Raphael asked, his eyes shining with a curiosity I couldn't understand. "Yes, Lucas. I gave him up for adoption many years ago," I replied, my voice trembling. I couldn't keep him. It was the best decision I could make." He stayed silent, looking at the photo for a moment longer. "He must have grown up," he commented, almost as if he were thinking aloud. "I know this must be very hard for you." I nodded, feeling the tears start to well up. It hurts every day. With each passing year, I wonder where he is, if he's okay. I just want to know if he remembers me. Raphael looked at me, and in that gaze I felt a strange connection, as if he was closer to me than I could have imagined. I'll do my best to help you, Mrs. Maria. I'll try to find out more about Lucas, he promised. Those words gave me a thread of hope, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Thank you, Dr. Raphael. It means a lot to me, I replied, my emotions raw. He smiled slightly, but his gaze was distant again, as if he were pondering something deeper. I promise I'll do everything I can. And as he walked away, I didn't know that this young doctor was about to discover something that would change our lives forever. I woke up feeling like I was floating between two worlds. My mind was still foggy, like I was trapped in a dense mist, but slowly reality began to materialize around me. The white light of the hospital bothered me, and the smell of disinfectant was strong and penetrating. I tried to move, but a sharp pain shot through my body, reminding me of what had happened. The accident, the hit and run, the fear I had felt. And then a familiar voice echoed in my mind, the voice of Lucas, my son. Maria? Are you hearing me? It was the voice of Dr. Raphael, soft and concerned. I opened my eyes, trying to focus, and saw him. The young doctor was standing in front of me, his gaze full of a mix of hope and anxiety. You're in the hospital. You had an accident, but you're on the road to recovery. Lucas, I whispered. The word came out almost as a lament. My son's name was always in my mind, like a mantra I silently repeated over the years. I need to find my son. Raphael leaned closer, and I could see the determination in his eyes. We're going to do that, Mrs. Maria. I promise I'll help you find him. He seemed so genuine, so determined. What was in his eyes? A spark of recognition? I didn't know, but something told me he wasn't just an ordinary doctor. As the days passed, my recovery became a daily battle. The nurses were kind, and Raphael always showed up to check on my progress. He encouraged me to get up, to walk, even though each movement was a monumental effort. You're stronger than you think, Maria, he would say, and I tried to believe it. One morning, as I was watching the flowers outside the window, I saw Raphael enter, holding something in his hands. Maria, I found this, he said with a sparkle in his eyes. It was a letter I had written years ago to Lucas. That piece of paper held all the love, pain, and hope I had accumulated over all those years. Where did you find this? My voice was choked. Raphael sat down beside me and began to read it aloud. Every word resonated in my heart like a distant echo, bringing back memories of a time I tried to forget but never stopped loving. My dear Lucas, if you ever read this, know that I never stopped loving you. Every day that passes, my heart cries out for your smile. I hope you're happy wherever you are. As he read, tears streamed down my face. I couldn't hold back the emotion. I didn't know if you were still alive, if anyone was taking care of you. My voice broke, and I let myself be carried away by the sadness. Maria, you don't have to feel that way, Raphael said, putting the letter aside and holding my hand. I'm here, and we're going to find your son. I promise I won't stop until that happens. Those words brought me a bit of comfort, but something else was happening. The pieces of the puzzle of my life were coming together in a strange and inexplicable way. Raphael was so involved in my story. It seemed there was a bond between us that transcended mere chance. In the following days, Raphael began to investigate my story. He delved into records, orphanages, and shelters, and always returned with new information. With each conversation, each discovery, I felt that a new hope was being born in my heart. Maria, I found a lead on a boy who was adopted around the same time you gave up Lucas. I'm going to pursue it, he said, with the determination of a man who knew he was about to discover something important. Thank you, Raphael, I replied, my voice full of gratitude. You don't know how much this means to me. And at that moment, I realized that the connection we were forming was much deeper than I had imagined. As I recovered, the idea of finding Lucas began to become a tangible reality. Raphael wasn't just my doctor. He had become my partner in the search for my son. And even amid the pain and uncertainty, a new hope began to bloom in my heart. I woke up in a white room, with the smell of disinfectant ingrained in my skin. The buzzing of machines and distant voices surrounded me, but everything seemed so far away, as if I were in a dream. That's when I saw Raphael, the doctor who had taken care of me, sitting beside me with a worried look. He was holding a folder of documents in his hand, and I felt a pang in my heart, as if something important was about to happen. "Mrs. Maria," he said, his voice soft but intense. "You're safe now. You underwent a complicated surgery, but you're recovering well." I just nodded, trying to process everything. The vision of my son Lucas playing in the dusty street was still etched in my mind. What would I do if he were here now? The pain of giving him up still throbbed in my heart. Raphael watched me with an intensity one couldn't understand. "We need to talk about your life, about your son." Those words sent a chill down my spine. What did he know? I found something. He opened the folder, and among the papers, there was the letter I had written to Lucas. My heart raced. This letter. Did you write it for him? Yes, I answered, my voice trembling. I didn't know if he would ever read it. He held it delicately, as if it were a treasure. "Mrs. Maria, I need you to know something." I researched. "I am Lucas." The world around me stopped. His words echoed in my mind, and I couldn't process the reality that was unfolding before me. "Lucas? You're my son." The tears began to flow down my face. I couldn't believe it. The boy I had given up so he could have a better life, the boy I never stopped loving, was there in front of me. "Yes, I am. And I always looked for you, even without knowing who you really were." I felt there was a void in my life. He came closer, and I hugged him with all the strength I had left. The warmth of his body, the familiar scent I didn't know I still remembered. All of it brought a wave of emotions. "I'm sorry, my son. I did what I thought was best for you." The guilt and pain mingled in words I couldn't control. "I never stopped thinking about you." He held me tighter. "I understand, Mom. I always knew you loved me. Life wasn't easy for me either. I went through many hardships, but I never stopped searching for you." The tears flowed freely now. "You don't know how much I dreamed of this moment. I always hoped that one day we would reunite. And now we're together again," he said, smiling through the tears. "We can rebuild our lives. There will be no more separation, I promise." Those words were like a balm for my wounded soul. I looked into his eyes and saw hope being reborn. "We'll do this together, Lucas. We'll build the future we always wanted." From that moment on, the wounds we carried seemed a little lighter. We talked for hours, sharing stories of our lives, the hardships we faced, and the hopes we nurtured. Each word exchanged was like a brick in the construction of a new relationship that, despite the painful past, promised a future full of love. "I want to know everything about you," I said. "Every detail of your life, your dreams, your accomplishments. I want to be by your side this time. And I want to know you, Mom. I want to know who you are, and what made you strong." He smiled, and I realized that despite the years of separation, the love had never disappeared. Life had tested us in many ways, but now there, in the hospital, we were beginning a new journey. We promised never to be apart again, and hope illuminated the path ahead of us. The reunion wasn't just a miracle. It was the redemption we both needed.
Dear listeners, today's story showed us the strength of the love between mother and son, and how life, even in the midst of its adversities, can surprise us with heartwarming reunions. What this story teaches us is that, however difficult our choices, True love never fades. It endures time, pain, and circumstances. Before we say goodbye, I'd like to ask you to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with someone who could benefit from this message. And at the end of the day, reflect on the relationships in your life. Who are the people who really matter to you? Do they know how much they are loved? Never let time erase the chance to reconnect with those you love. Thank you so much for following us, and don't forget, life is a breath, but true love is eternal.